So, you're interested in trying to get into Yu-Gi-Oh! But, of course, that's very hard to do. You don't know where to start, how to build a deck, or where to even play the game. Well, this video is for you. I've collected a ton of resources for new players, including information on where to buy cards, how to find meta decks and deck lists, as well as some cheap options for entering the game. The chapter titles are a series of questions, so if you're confused about any single aspect, consider skipping to one of those. This video doesn't contain a summary of the basic rules, so I suggest you look at one of the following linked videos or platforms to learn specifics. Let me start by explaining what formats of Yu-Gi-Oh! There are, and then we'll move on to what you're actually getting into. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has 3 different formats: TCG, OCG, and Master Duel. Speed Duel and Rush Duel are separate games from the main formats. Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG is the main physical paper format for English-speaking and Western players. OCG is the Japanese and Asian format of Yu-Gi-Oh! OCG cards are not legal in the TCG, and vice versa. Master Duel is the online format for Yu-Gi-Oh! Under the Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel game. Generally, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel plays the exact same as the TCG and OCG, but has a separate pool of legal cards, and is usually several card releases behind the other 2 formats. This video primarily covers the TCG and paper play, but we will also go into Master Duel, as it's the cheapest option and probably the best entry point for new players. Modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! Can best be described as a puzzle game, where players have to figure out and then dismantle an opponent's options. Through a variety of strategies, players use their decks to build up strong disruptions to counter an opponent's potential options, while an opponent has to then figure out how to either break through or preempt these counters. Unlike other card games, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is interactive from the start. You must be ready to play immediately in a game. I'm telling you this because you cannot go into a modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Event and expect to not bother with an opponent immediately. Games are fast, and unfortunately, there's not much that can be done to slow things down. I really do recommend first copying someone else's deck list before attempting to build your own. On top of this, most decks require an understanding of combos to play. Skilled play comes from understanding your and your opponent's combos, specifically their starters, choke points, and multiple pathways through each combo. Don't feel bad having to look up a guide for how to play each individual deck. Google exists and is your friend. Just about every topping player has a video where they talk about how their list works and why it is the way it is. You can use Yugioh Pro's deck section under tournament decks to find any deck list you want, and if they have a corresponding video. For Master Duel, I recommend MasterDuelMeta.com. Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks can be broken down into a few key sections: hand traps, staples, starters, extenders, and combo pieces. Hand traps are those cards that can disrupt an opponent's plays immediately by just being in hand. These are generic and will often be ran in every deck. Staples are generic cards that fill gaps in a strategy. They could be used in breaking an opponent's board, drawing the correct card you need, or countering common options. Hand traps are technically staples, but for a new player, I thought I'd make a difference. Starters, extenders, and combo pieces are all the in-archetype or in-engine cards that define each specific strategy. Starters are cards that enable combos, extenders are cards that let you follow up a starter if it gets disrupted, and combo pieces are cards that are required for combos to work. Understanding the nuance between the ratios of needed cards can only come with experience, so use a guide when building your first deck. Each deck has a different end goal, uses different mechanics, uses different card types, and different playstyles. So pick the deck that's right for you. I recommend following a deck choice guide like one of my how to choose a deck videos. You can subscribe to my channel for new ones to be released every so often with fun individual recommendations in between. I have some great budget choices later on in this video, but for now, just choose what deck looks interesting to you, and don't be afraid to experiment with different playstyles. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is ultimately very expensive. Even the cheapest tournament topping decks will cost you a few $100s, and competitive staples can be $100 each. This video suggests some of the cheaper ways to enter the game. First things first, you can play completely for free using an online simulator. There are 3 main simulators I want to talk about: Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, Yugioh Pro, and Dueling Book. Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is the only official simulator that is actually for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It's got its own format and its own card crafting and collecting system. Unfortunately, this does mean that getting cards and experimenting can be a bit rough and sometimes locked behind a paywall. However, Master Duel has some of the best and only tutorials for new players. Master Duel also has a gateway into competitive play. It's a bad gateway, but still a gateway. If you're planning on using Master Duel, I recommend following a guide once you figure out what deck you want. Generally, just understand that most archetypes are locked behind secret packs that can be unlocked by crafting or pulling a card from them. Also, look for creating a list of staples like Maxi and Ash Blossom, as these can be used in every deck. For the other two options, we have the third-party sims. On one hand, these aren't officially ran by Konami, but on the other, they're completely free, have access to every card and format, and are used by most people in the hobby. Dueling Book is comparable to Tabletop Simulator. It's got every option open by leaving the controls to players. Plus, it's available easily in browser with no downloads. It's great for testing and learning if you have a friend to play with. Although, if you don't know exactly how some cards and combos work, it can be a bit much. EDO Pro is my choice for an automated sim, meaning it will play card effects automatically after you choose them. There is a download for this one, which is linked in the description along with everything else. Overall, I'd recommend the third-party sims since you don't need to jump through hoops to test out any cards you want. Plus, they're actually up to date with the modern format. I recommend you play decks online first before you buy them. It can be pricey to pick up any deck. This brings us to the question, how do we pick up a deck? I could recommend my choice of meta picks that I find fun and new player friendly, but for most new players, price is likely going to be the biggest deciding factor. So here are my two paths to entry that can be done for less than $100. First off, we have the structure deck route. Typically, structure decks have decent strategies that can be combined with some extra support to make a competent deck. Do note, you will need to buy 3 copies of a structure deck to get a playset of the cards you need from it. The most recent structure deck, Fire Kings, is an excellent example for a starter deck with meta potential. It comes packaged with 2 competitive staples and a Fire King engine, which has several different good builds. The Tri-Brigade build of Fire Kings I'm showing here was picked due to being cheaper. This deck is all about using Fire Kings for explosive recursive destruction synergy, and Tri-Brigade for some easy link climbing and extra disruption. The 2 expensive cards that double the price of this build are single copy of Access Code Talker and SP Little Knight. These are good cards, but we can substitute them. Outside of that, this deck only requires $30 in Fire King structure decks, a $60 Tri-Brigade engine, and a few miscellaneous staples. Once you get comfortable and want to go full competitive, it can be upgraded into a Snake Eyes or Diabellstar engine. Of course, not every starter deck is this good, so check online to see if they have any tournament results or contain staple cards. Some newer ones I recommend are Beware the Traptrix and Albaz Strike. Albaz Strike requires a lot more outside purchases than the other 2 starter decks, but it's a great starting point for a new player. Beware of Traptrix has some excellent staples and is a solid deck, but overall it's a bit weaker than the other ones. Plus, the art is not great. Structure decks, the Crimson King, Dark World, and Shaddoll Showdown are great picks, but really only if you're interested in those particular strategies. They're just too niche to recommend to everyone. There are of course a ton of bad starter decks, like Legend of the Crystal Beast, Cyber Strike, Freezing Chains, Spirit Charmers, and Sacred Beasts. These structure decks don't contain meta strategies, and barely have any staples to justify their existence at all. If you're not interested in a structure deck option, you're still not entirely out of hope. Budget decks do exist, although your options will be limited. The first thing you'll have to do is understand where the price of decks comes from. Usually it'll either be from new decks and engines, or from staple cards. Typically, the 3 biggest generic cards inflating prices at the time of this video's release are SP Little Knight, being over $100 per card, Triple Tactics Thrust at $70 a piece, and Access Code Talker at $40 a piece. These are expensive because they perform a mechanical function that's irreplaceable, and Konami designed them to be artificially rare. You can substitute these cards with worse options. Access Code has Brotosword Dragon, Triple Tactics Thrust has Triple Tactics Talent, and SP Little Knight really has no direct replacements, but I guess you could play whatever generic Nightmare Link you have available. Unfortunately, there will always be expensive staple cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Accept this, and either bite the bullet, or work harder than everyone else to play around it. If replacing these staples aren't enough, you can look at a budget deck. For example, here's Marincess, a less than $100 deck that's all about creating a big unkillable water link monster. It's also just a cool deck that uses fun water monsters such as Totally Awesome and World Sea Dragon Zelia. Nothing in this deck is individually over $5, so it's a great pick for players looking to enter the game on a budget. Flowandereeze is a great deck, all about stunning the opponent and using anti-meta options to annoy your opponent to death. This deck's main mechanics are normal and tribute summon chaining, which is very cool. The deck also synergizes with banishing cards, so it can just automatically win some matchups. It's also below $100 and can be extremely cheap, since the entire extra deck is practically optional. Virtual World is a Synchro and XYZ deck that can pivot into any situation, depending on the player's needs. The term used to describe the playstyle is Toolbox. By using the levels 3, 6, and 9, you can solve any problem. It's a great deck to grow with, but it's a bit more expensive, being around the $150 mark. It's a great deck for new players nevertheless. Rika's Sun Avalon Theron is a very strong deck for around $100 even after the ban list. It's probably much too complicated for a new player, but it's very cheap, especially for how good it is. I personally play this deck and it's very fun. I think these recommendations cover most bases. There's a ton more options to play, so don't be afraid to research other options and then playtest them online. I imagine at this point, you might be confused where to buy cards. I'll start by giving one very general piece of advice. Do not buy sealed product outside of starter decks. You will not pull the cards you want, and these packs are mathematically designed to screw you out of your money. You can watch a different video of mine for more details on that. What you should do as a consumer is buy singles. This means individual cards. You can find singles at most local game stores or online through a site like TCG Player for America or Card Market for Europe. These websites are trustworthy and usually have the cheapest prices on individual cards. It is ridiculously cheaper to buy single cards than sealed product. Plus, you get exactly what you pay for without gambling. Also, don't forget to buy card sleeves. Sleeves are used to protect cards and minimize cheating. Most tournaments will require them, and most players will think less of you for not having them. For nice sleeves, I recommend Dragon Shield mats. For general purpose budget, I recommend Ultra Pro. Try to avoid first party sleeves with art on them. They tend to damage and break easily. Yu-Gi-Oh cards are smaller than Magic the Gathering sleeves, so they use Japanese size sleeves, and not standard. Once you find your deck and get all the cards for it, what next? Well, that's when you get to go to tournaments. There are 4 main levels for tournaments: local tournaments, regional tournaments, YCS or Yu-Gi-Oh Championship Series and National Championships, and then World Championships. Anyone can enter regionals and local events, but YCSs and higher require invites from lower events, usually regionals. There's a whole separate process for going to Worlds. For a beginner player, the only real important events are going to be local tournaments. These can be found at your local game store. Local game stores host smaller tournaments a few times a week. These will have $5 or $10 entry and will give out special Yu-Gi-Oh prize packs called OTS packs. Tournaments will be 3 to 5 rounds, each consisting of a best 2 out of 3 with another player. These events are a great way to meet with people, learn the game, and make friends. Most players are friendly, so don't be afraid to ask questions or let them know you're new. It's completely usual to lose your first few events, so don't get discouraged. Should caveat that if you're going to trade with anyone, make sure you know the prices of your cards. I recommend using TCG Player for that. Also, if you don't like a store, look for others. Each store is different and have their own players and culture. A store that does Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic the Gathering will be completely different from a store that does Yu-Gi-Oh! And Cardfight Vanguard. Alright, that's it for my new player guide. You can check out my channel for other Yu-Gi-Oh! Content if you're interested. I also cover the One Piece card game and the general TCG market quite frequently. So please subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.